Hello, everyone. We still have a few spots left in Kinetics Summer School here in Longmont, Colorado. It's happening from July 30th through August 8th. Kinetics is my method of mapping the whole human organism through partner fascia release. We'll be gathering for 10 days to learn kinetics and explore our capacity for healing and regeneration together. We'll also be taking a one-day adventure break to Rocky Mountain National Park, and I'm really looking forward to that. So for more information, you can go to kinetics.academy and click on Summer School or click the link in the description below. With that, please enjoy this episode.
It's far too easy to look at the person with a white coat and the alphabet soup after their name and think, well, they know better than I do. You know exactly what you need to do. You know exactly what you need to do. It's a matter of stopping and listening and cultivating that sense of deep knowing and intuition. It will serve you well. Your body is on your side, by the way. It's not against you. The symptoms are not something bad that needs to be tamped down. It's your body's way of saying, hey, there's something that's a little off and I want to help you identify it and correct it. Because I do want actually everyone to live, energetically, full of vitality, all the things that are their birthright. And I think a first step may be stopping the outsourcing of the health and starting to look a little bit more within and up.
Hilda, welcome to the Human Freedom Project podcast. It's so good to have you here.
I am so happy to be here. I love your heart.
Oh, thank you. Well, most of my audience probably doesn't know, but we did a little bit of coaching. So it's in part thanks to you and your support that I'm doing a podcast. And you are the host of the Wise Traditions podcast. So that would explain why I was doing some coaching with you. So you've been podcasting for quite some time now, like 8 years.
Mm-hmm. That's right. 8 years and 13 million downloads later. It's doing amazing. Yes. Yeah. I'm thankful.
Okay. Well, I want, rather than doing like a traditional bio, I'd love to ask, what is your mission? Like, you seem like you're on a mission, and you're having fun doing it too, which is amazing. And it's so apparent in everything you do. But I'd love, in your own words, to explain to people, what is your mission?
Thank you for asking me that. I have it very clearly delineated because a friend of mine told me a year or two ago, she said, Hilda, everyone should be able to fill in this blank. I'm so happy and grateful now that. I'm so happy and grateful now that. And so I took that phrase and ruminated on, what am I happy and grateful about? What am I motivated to do? What's my mission? What gets me excited to get out of bed in the morning? And I have defined it now as this. I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm a content creator, an experiential anthropologist, exploring the world, uncovering ancient health traditions to restore the energy and vitality of humanity. And I know that's a mouthful, but basically it means, yes, I'm like Dora the Explorer 2.0. I always joke around. I don't have a monkey. I don't have a map, but I do have a mission because it's so important, Elisha. I'm so passionate about helping people rediscover ancient traditions for good health today. I think we're often looking for the next hack, let me get a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. And, maybe I need to see a different kind of specialist for Reiki. And those things may be needed. I'm not trying to knock them at all. But I think we're overlooking something that's staring us right in the face. What has stood the test of time? What has served humanity since the beginning of time? Maybe there are some clues there for a healthy lifestyle today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some of those things have been there been a part of culture, a part of our diet, a part of our way of living for thousands and thousands of years. And then in the last couple hundred years in the Western world, we've just changed everything so radically, for good and bad. So this is going to be maybe a radical departure from that, and then we'll come back to it. But I was looking at your Instagram and I found a little video of you and your dad. Where a little while back he fractured his arm playing tennis, and he's 92. Is that right?
Yes.
And you guys are just so cute together. And I was like, oh, that's where she gets some of this from. Because in the video, you were just saying, Dad, you're not gonna, you're not done playing tennis. Like, you're gonna get back out there. He's like, of course.
Absolutely. He is my hero.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to share what you've learned from your dad, maybe your mom too. That was the only one that jumped out at me. But, just looking at your Instagram and looking at what you're doing and your mission, you're so out there with it. Now I'm like, okay, I see where some of that comes from, because a lot of people would be stopped by an injury, especially at 92.
Right.
And I want to go into your story too in childhood. But yeah, what did you learn from your dad growing up?
I appreciate so much you're asking, because he really is unstoppable. Most people his age, as you said, would be like, okay, I hurt myself. Now I'm going to always use a cane, or, for goodness sakes, I'm never going to get on the court again. And my dad is the opposite. He said, I'm going to work on my nimbleness. I'm going to stay able to move as long as I can. And this is such a good example for me. And so I think what I've learned from my dad and my mom, actually, may she rest in peace, she passed away just like 4 years ago, is their joie de vivre. In other words, they love life. They enjoy every minute. And I think it's important for us to remember, Elisha, that we can too quickly become very uptight. The very people who want to live free, I'm glad your show is the Human Freedom Project, the very people who want to live free lives are uptight, and I would say sometimes even shackled by shackles of their own making. They decide, I'm never going to eat a corn chip that has GMOs, which, by the way, I don't want to necessarily either, but I try not to take myself or my boundaries too seriously, because life is both short and long at the same time. It's a little bit of a paradox, and I want to enjoy every moment. So if someone offers me something that they took the time to make, for example, let's say homemade cookies, I'm not going to ask them, what kind of oils did you use in this? Even though I know I would rather have butter or coconut oil rather than a seed oil, some kind of canola oil or soybean oil. I don't want any of that stuff, but I'm just going to receive it with gratitude and trust that my body can reject what isn't good and take what is. And by the way, that cookie was made with love. And so my dad has not been super strict, nor was my mom, about diet, which was good in this sense. Our dining room table growing up was never a battlefield. It was never, you have to clean your plate. And I'm so glad, because food should be a time of joyous communion and connection with our food, with where it came from, but with each other. And if you're busy fighting on why they didn't eat that last bite of vegetables, then you're, kind of missing part of the point, I think. So I'm really grateful that my parents love life as much as they have, and also that they didn't make the dining room table a battleground.
I'm curious if you could have any more examples of like watching your parents live with that joie de vivre that you describe growing up while bumping into some obstacles, because what you just described, and yes, I'm all about freedom, but I love talking about it in depth, because we tend to assume freedom means doing whatever you want, whenever you want. But the thing is, as you just pointed to, if we don't realize that what we value, if we hold on to it so tightly, then we actually ossify. We actually stop feeling free, because we're so attached to things going our way or being able to do the things we want to do. That, I work with people in pain mostly in my private practice and in my teaching, and people are afraid to get out there again. That's why when I saw that video, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. We get injured or something bad happens, and then we shrink our world, and then we shrink our world, and we shrink our world. So do you have any other examples, of watching your dad model that from childhood?
Yes, absolutely. So the fact that he is in this country in the first place, because he's from Cuba, and talk about freedom, there is none there, and there wasn't any when he was a young man. And he had this advantage. So I think his family would send him to Florida to study. So he went back and forth in a time when there was more freedom. And then when Castro took power, things became oppressive, and he was able to get out. But he had to create a whole new life. My mom left Mexico. They actually met in the U.S. as they were creating their new lives. And it wasn't easy. They certainly confronted obstacles. My father, thank goodness, actually had this fluency in English and Spanish that he was able to leverage for a good position at the Organization of American States as a translator and an interpreter. My mother just kind of had her little, I would say, kind of chutzpah, for lack of a better word, just like a kind of go-getter attitude. So she just would always be we used to joke she was like the unsinkable Molly Brown. I think there was some movie back in the day based on some women who survived the Titanic is sinking. And my mom, actually, when she was little, she was from a very poor family in Mexico, one of 12 kids. And at one point, I think she was on the back of a bike that they all shared. They took turns riding around the block on this bike, and she fell into a mud puddle. And she was very little, I would say a toddler at the time. And the brother like got her out of the mud puddle, but it's like she was, choked up with all the mud and water and stuff. And he brought her home and just said to his mom, "I'm sorry, like she's gone." And his mom was like, "Well, I'm not going to bury her dirty like that." So she started to wash her off. And then I guess my mom started coughing up the med and stuff. So she survived. And so both my parents, I applaud. Now, they were not without their flaws. They are not without their flaws, but I applaud their determination, their perseverance. It wasn't easy to leave their families and start a new one here in the U.S. As a matter of fact, their marriage fell apart when I was about 11. But to my dad's credit and to my mom's credit, they stayed connected so that my dad could stay in our lives. I have two sisters. So he would come over every Sunday and he'd take us to the movies. He would take us bowling. It wasn't always the most, emotionally profound conversations that we had with him, but he did the best he could. And I think it was in talking with Joel Salatin one time, he said to me, the marker of adulthood is the ability and the maturity to forgive our parents and to understand that they did the best they could. So I would hasten to say, Elisha, that my relationship with my father is now better than it ever has been. Because as a kid, just imagine these two forceful Latino parents. Like, it was intimidating to be around him. Plus, he was trying to teach us Spanish. So he was very passionate about it and would often correct us if we made mistakes. He had that teacher, Ben, and so that could be intimidating. And sometimes I felt like, are you even listening to what I'm saying? Because you're correcting my mistakes and staying on the surface instead of going deep. But again, I know now he was giving me the gift of language, which I'm so thankful for because I've used it in Peru and Ecuador and Mexico, all over the world. I'm really thankful. And actually, before I started podcasting, I was a translator. So that was my first career. And I would take things in Spanish and French. I'm a little bit of a polyglot like my dad. I would take things from other languages and translate them into English. And so that has served me well because now I'm a communicator of different information, but I love it just as much.
Wow. And I found out doing a little research on you, you led worship too, which is a different form of communication.
I know. Oh my gosh. And thank you for mentioning that because people don't know this about me. I have a very strong spiritual streak. I feel, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. I feel closer to God than ever before. Although some might say, well, Hilda, you've been exposed to so many strange religions and belief systems. Perhaps you're further away from your Christian roots, if you will. But I feel like I have greater compassion and understanding and insights into and also I will say I have witnessed other people's faith and it has been a testimony to me. I'm not threatened by other belief systems. I actually find it beautiful. And I also still believe how I do. I still have my Christian faith. That really was formative for me in my teenage years. But it doesn't seem contradictory to me because I feel like everyone, just like you may have noticed in all your patients, they come at healing from different approaches. Someone might have an emotional trauma that is holding up their healing, and that's why they have plantar fasciitis or whatever, right? Other people might have, they were literally in a car accident. And so I think wherever in the world people are, they can find God. And the Bible does say, seek me and you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. And I do believe in my heart that is true.
Me too. I'm kind of coming out of the closet with my spiritual side lately as well. Okay, so I'm probably going to want to come back to that because I'm very interested to hear more about how that dovetails with everything you've been doing. And also, I think just watching you and looking at other people too who have this the faith to take risks, that it is a faith, and it's the faith that allows us to take risks, I think. So I want to come back to that, but I'd love for you to share your story of you have an amazing story of being born with a birth defect and going through something, I would consider pretty intense to be,
Yes.
To be born with that experience. So can you share that?
Yes, thank you for asking. And it does move me, but I've also gotten to a place in my life and in my healing to say, okay, if I move, that's good and that's okay. And I can accept that. How you have to reprogram yourself. But I will say, so I think one reason I do have that faith streak is because I understand how precious life is and I see it as a gift because of my shaky start. And so my mother had come to this country leaving her traditions, and part of what she left was actually real food traditions. So she came to this U.S. and quickly embraced the convenience foods. And I think, unfortunately, her vitamin A stores were low. And when that happens, your baby will be susceptible to birth defects. Now, another part of this story, which I'm not sure, how much it plays a part, but is that she was exposed to the German measles. And now I question everything, so I question contagion. But be that as it may, she was exposed to the German measles, and doctors will say, if you are pregnant or expecting and you are exposed to the German measles, your baby will be born with a serious birth defect. And they told my mom before I was born that they were supposing I would be blind or unable to speak or unable to hear.
I'm sure you know about nocebo, right? The opposite of
Yes.
placebo.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. So speaking that over her probably was not helpful, right? That's right. And I always say diagnosis is not destiny. So if anyone is listening right now and they've gotten some bad news from the doctor, I would reprogram the heck out of that baby, take that one out and replace it with positive thoughts and the truth about your potential and the power within. I have so much to say on that subject. But going back to this, so my mother, good for her, said, no, I am not going to get rid of this baby because that was one of the things that was recommended. She said, I'm going to have this baby. And when I was born, there was nothing visible to the naked eye. As they listened to my heart over the course of a couple of months, they noticed there was a murmur. So I was born, actually, yes, with a serious birth defect. It was a hole in my heart between the lower two ventricles. And they really had to keep an eye on me. They call these kind of babies blue babies because the blood isn't oxygenating properly because it's flowing in the wrong direction. And happily, at age 9, they performed open heart surgery. And I say happily because it did not repair itself and they didn't know how long I would live if they didn't intervene. So they cracked me open. They literally put my body on ice so that all the bodily functions would slow down so that they could sew up the heart. I think this is one side note, one reason I like cold therapy. But anyway, they sewed up the heart. They put it back in me. They sewed me up and left me with a huge scar on my chest. And at the same time, they said, now you can do whatever you want. Because up until that time, I was a little cautious kid, like, oh, can I get on that roller coaster? Is my heart going to explode? I didn't know. And I felt kind of fragile. And then they said I could do whatever I want. So I decided, well, actually, first I wanted to thank God because I felt like I was protected in the womb. It could have been so much worse. And then there was a doctor who said to me, the cross might have been in the shape of a T like that. It might not have been like this. It might have been with the wood across the top. And I felt, oh my gosh, I've been marked. I have this T-shaped, cross-shaped scar that reminds me of how precious my life is and how I've been saved. So I definitely thanked God, and that kind of led me down a path of relationship with God in that way. And then the other thing was I realized I want to make sure my body is as healthy as possible for as long as possible. So I never wanted to drink. I never did drugs. And then I tell people jokingly, sometimes I was like, did I shave my head? Did I make that kind of vow? No, I was only 9 years old, for goodness sake. But I knew what I wanted to do. And then as I got older, I realized, oh my goodness, I want to help other people do the same.
So were you brought up Christian? I'm just curious where that came from. Like, I want to thank God.
Thank you for asking me. I wasn't, but I was interested because my best friend was a Catholic and she was one of 8 kids in her family. And I just really felt the love in her family. And whenever I would spend the night and the next day was Sunday, they were like, okay, we're going to church. And there was something about it that really resonated with me, Elisha. It really made me feel good. And like, this is right. There's something about this that's ringing true to me. And this is actually one thing I'll say to anybody who's agnostic or atheist or even just seeking what the best healing modality is for them. We have to reconnect with our intuition, our deep knowing, because there is something within each of us, a sixth sense, I think, that can be cultivated and rediscovered if we take the time to do so. When I was in Australia on one of my trips, I met a woman, an Aboriginal woman, who said, in my tribe, in my culture, we have this custom called Dediri, of deep listening. And this woman was going to be a hairdresser working in a Vidal Sassoon salon, which is a fine career. But she left it because she started listening to her intuition, paying attention to her dreams, doing this custom of Dediri, led her to where she is now. She calls herself the Ancestral Whisperer. Her name is Suzanne Thompson, and she oversees land that once belonged to her Inangai tribe, or that was once occupied by the Inangai tribe. In Australia, they don't say that the land belongs to anyone. So all this to say, my intuition and my inclination as a young child was, I believe in God because I think he took care of me. And then when I was in high school, someone presented the Christian faith. And again, that resonated with me. And I was like, okay, so God loves me just as I am and sent his son to die for me so that I could be in relationship with him. There now is a way to connect with him. We don't have to do the blood sacrifices of the Old Testament and so forth. And so this resonated with me. And so I have felt, I will say, from womb to tomb, an anointing on my life. Some people say, oh, Hilda, you were meant to be a podcaster. It's so cool that you're doing it. I absolutely think I was meant to be, but I also was meant to be a worship leader. And I also used to be a director of communications for Body and Soul, a Christian fitness organization. So I have felt this kind of blessing all my life. Does that mean it's been easy and perfect? Absolutely not. There have been struggles and obstacles and challenges, but I've also felt kind of a sweet communion with God. And so I do suggest that people stay and or learn to be still. And it's hard when we're human doings instead of human beings, right? But in that stillness, we might hear what our ancestors have for us, or our deep knowing and conscience and intuition has for us, or even God.
I'm curious, where do you hear that? Like, is it because the reason I'm asking is I think that knowing, that voice, that knowing, can come in different places. Like, I have a belief that truth is felt in the body. Like, we just feel it. It's just a knowing. And it's not something you can prove to anybody. It's simply a knowing. But yeah, then we also hear things, or maybe we have imaginations, or we see something and it produces a feeling, maybe a feeling of knowing or truth. So how does that manifest for you?
I feel like it's been in all the ways you just described, and sometimes imperceptibly. What I mean is, I don't always have an audible voice of God saying, do this today, Hilda, but I'll have a feeling like I should reach out to that person. And all of us have had this from time to time, right? Like, oh, I should call. Why did my cousin just come to mind? I'm going to give her a call. Maybe nothing bad happened and that's great, and you just thought of her, but you acted on that. And so in my life, there have been times, well, even how I came to be the Wise Traditions podcast host for the Weston A. Price Foundation, I had no training in podcasting. What made me possibly think is what I was supposed to do. But sometimes you do have, as they say, energy, intelligence, imagination, and love. And if you pour them in a certain direction, you will get guided. I've heard it said, too, that God can't steer a parked car, which doesn't make sense to me because God can do anything. But the idea is, while you're moving, things will happen, and you have forks in the road all along the way. So you're tapping into your intuition, even if you don't know it, I would dare say. So for me, what happened was, I love this Weston A. Price Foundation. I was a translator, like I said. So I thought, I wonder if I could, kind of modernize their brochures a little bit. Because they're actually very ancestral looking. And I thought maybe I can make it more bullet points or something and help out there. But that wasn't what was supposed to be. But I was supposed to be connected with them. So I became a chapter leader. And then they needed 2 volunteers to go to Kenya. Get this. It's because this Maasai warrior contacted them and said, send someone over. We're all getting sick. This is a Maasai tribesman. These people are known for being hale and hearty and fertile and optimistic. They're nomadic people who can survive on milk and meat and blood. Like, they don't grow a lot of vegetables over there, and he was calling us to say, send someone over, because he had seen the physical degeneration of his people as they started to depart from their traditional food ways. And he had gotten a hold of some of our brochures and such. So I raised my hand. Sally sent me and one other woman we went over there, and it was such a privilege, Elisha, because I didn't say, eat our American way. Oh, no. I was like, please eat your way. Please eat the way that served you since the beginning of time. And I'm warning you, as people who have gone off the cliff in our country, and we've departed from traditional foodways. I don't even know what we had, 200 some years ago here. We're a young country. So I said, I'm telling you, go in the other direction, reverse. And so my message was well received, and it was beautiful. But it was when I was there that I met one of the elders in the community, and I couldn't help myself. I grabbed my phone and I thought, I'm going to hit voice memo and record a conversation with this man. His name was Ole Sanku. And he, in that tribe, they don't keep track of how old they are. He didn't know how old he was, but we tried to figure it out later. We think he was about 100 years old. He came up to where I was staying under his own auspices, literally just using a walking stick. He sat down, and through a translator, I asked him, what did you eat as a child? How did you maintain your health? Tell me these things. And so he started to share things. He said, we ate whatever we could catch, literally like hippos and gazelles and whatever, kudu, whatever they could find. And then he said, well, in terms of health, he said, we never got sick. And by the way, he is not the only Indigenous person that has told me that. He said, we never got sick. He said, if we ever felt like a chill coming on, we would just drink milk from the cow. And he demonstrated getting the milk from the udder. And I was like, oh my goodness. So at the time, I had been listening to the Serial podcast, which was popular back then. This is about 8 years ago. And so when I got back, I said to Sally, I said, you all should have a podcast, and I can host and produce it. And she said, okay, not checking my resume. But it all worked out because I wanted to lift up voices like Ole Sanku's, and we have had the privilege of getting some Indigenous voices lifted up. And also some people in this alternative health space like Tom Cowan, Bruce Lipton, Luke Story, Ben Greenfield, people who are finding a new way of health outside the conventional paradigm and system. So it's been a huge privilege. But I mention all this to say, in the context of intuition, I don't know what made me think I could do it, except that I just had that feeling. And so I just went with it. And I probably didn't even think of it before I said it, or I would have been too scared, like, oh no, she's going to want to see my credentials. No, I just did it. And so that's part of the secret of life, I think, is not getting into that frozen state. A lot of times we'll talk about how there's this flight or fight, situation when we're in the sympathetic nervous system and we're feeling stressed, and, immediately it's one of those two. But a third option is actually just freezing like a deer in the headlights. And that can happen. We can get immobilized by insecurities or doubts or confusion. And I say, just kind of love God and sin boldly, love God and go for it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, well, something else will come your way. So I really am convinced of that. But the other cool thing, I'll just tie this up with a bow here, is to tell you, at one time I had 3 jobs. I was the Wise Traditions podcast host, I was a worship leader, and I was the director of communications for Body and Soul. And I realized, oh gosh, I have to kind of hone down a little bit here because this is a lot for anybody. And the podcast at that time had like at least 1 million downloads. And I remember talking with my pastor, and he said, Hilda, if you don't leave, I'm going to kick you out. He said, I'm going to kick you out. Not because he didn't like me, not because I couldn't sing, but because he could see God's fingerprints all over what I was doing. And I thought, isn't this beautiful that he can recognize that this is a ministry of sorts? And so I did leave the Body and Soul job. I left the worship leading, and now I'm committed to content creation, like I said, and podcasts. I
love that. I want to drill down on that actually, because I think that what you embody is extremely rare. And that it can be cultivated. And it's something I try to teach some of my students. So, I have a methodology that involves stepping on people. And that takes a lot of gumption because the results are worth it, but it hurts. So it's not like getting a massage or going to the spa or doing something nice, it's a little like getting in the cold, doing something you don't want to do, but there are benefits to it. But to be the one that actually does that to other people, like, hey, I'm going to step on you and it's going to hurt. It takes a certain gumption, a certain kind of spirit. And I definitely see you embodying that, where I love the word gumption. I think that fits you so well. So yeah, I'd just love to drill down on that for a moment. Like, And I think it ties into this faith thing that I said I wanted to come back to, because the way that I kind of conceptualize it for me anyway, and I'd love to hear if it's different for you, is it's kind of like, hey, life is an experiment. It's a playground, and the outcome is not up to me. My job is to listen and act on the knowings that come to me. And then whatever happens after that is actually like not really in my control. But like we're so, maybe just because of that, nervous system, fight, flight, reptile part of us, survival biology, I call it, we want to be able to predict the outcome. We want to be in control. And so it's such a strange phenomenon to me, but I see so many people actually would rather live with predictable pain than the unpredictable freedom that comes from letting go of outcomes. It's so what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. Yes, this is resonating with me quite a bit. Two thoughts come to mind. One is a book I have read over and over and over again that has helped shape my understanding of these things we're discussing. And it's called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. He is a Jesuit priest from the 20th century. I think he was from India. And so he had a very unique take on how to kind of wake up. And that's a term we use a lot nowadays too, right? We need to wake up. We need to wake up to who we are and our autonomy and all these things. And that's great. And it really starts with, as he said, it's hard to put our finger on it exactly, right? The process. But he said sometimes we can just say, it's not that, it's not that. But I do think stillness is a part of what is required, and a willingness to detach, which you alluded to a moment ago, a willingness to detach from the outcome. And I would also even say part of the process. What I mean by that is we identify with so much, not just a diagnosis, like I said earlier, like I'm depressed or I'm a Latina, but of course I might have depression or I might be of a certain heritage, but what if I detached from my labels? It's actually so freeing. And then it makes life more fun and playful, and we become less concerned with how we're perceived. This has been a process over the course of a number of years for me, actually. Of course, because I still want people to think well of me, there's still bits of the ego there and so forth. But I've learned a lot about how, we can live in more freedom than we may have ever realized. And I think part of it is returning to that childlike wonder about ourselves and those around us and the planet we live on. So I'll tell just a little story here. The more I connect with nature, and it's one thing as a health coach, surprisingly, I learned nothing about. It was all about nutrition when I studied with Institute for Integrative Nutrition, of course. But I was also a fitness professional at the time. And if I had 15 minutes outside, Elisha, it was all I got. It was a day. It was a good day. I don't know. I was just running from my car to get groceries and then back into the car to pick up the kids from school. And even to the gym, I wasn't spending much time outside. And now I've discovered the wonder of being still and observing. And so as I observe nature and realize, we weren't meant to be apart from nature, we're a part of it, I've learned to also observe myself in a kind of detached, compassionate way. And it's really helpful because I can be curious and not judging. So, for example, I had an encounter with someone recently, and something they said, quote unquote, made me feel bad. I felt bad after the encounter. I felt scolded. I felt like a child. And I was like, okay, notice that. Also, by the way, when you feel these things, don't blame the other person. It's a time for growth and introspection and noticing, I felt this way when I saw that email. Okay. And then I noticed how long I was thinking about it. I surprised myself because I'm a kind of a shake it off girl, move on. No, I was like exercising. I was thinking about it. I was texting someone. I was thinking about it. It stuck with me for a little while. But what was beautiful was I worked on not judging myself for thinking about it for so long. I worked on not judging the person. And then recently I saw them in person when we talked it through, and I had greater understanding of where they were coming from. Where I felt like they were, correcting me and giving me a hard time, and where I felt like a child, they just had a different perspective. This is most of life, by the way. And so I really want to encourage the listener and others on this journey to learn to look with compassion on others. And part of it is just having curiosity. Like, what if I thought, oh, that person's being so mean, they're just a meanie. If I slapped a label on them, I would stop seeing them and I wouldn't have compassion. And guess what? That's limiting them and it's limiting me because ultimately we're all connected, right? So by having understanding and compassion with them, then I can have more for myself. And it's such a beautiful thing. That's one story I want to tell. But the other one is just one of those, do your thing when you can get over yourself and just have fun. Surprising things happen in life. So here's one of them that happened to me. I was in college and some friends and I were hanging out and one of them was like, hey, let's just do something crazy. Let's pretend one of us is getting married and let's go into that bridal shop and try on wedding gowns. I was like, I'm in. I was so excited. So I got my friend's ring and she had a ring from her grandmother. I stuck it on my ring finger. We went in and I started trying on dresses. Oh my gosh, we were laughing so much. I said yes to the dress before I ever said yes to anybody. There we were and kind of giggling behind the sales lady back. She doesn't know what's going on. And then another friend walked into the shop who was looking for a special dressed up, gown for some event. And she didn't know what we were doing. And I thought, oh no, she's going to tip off the sales lady because she's going to say something about how, of course, I'm not getting married because she knows I'm not getting married. We were good friends. So I was like, oh, what can I do? So I decided to run up to her and kind of preemptively say something. And so I said, Susie, you'll never guess who I'm marrying. And I just blurted out a name of a guy who was in the friend zone with all of me and my friends. And do you know, his name is Mitch Gore. I ended up marrying him like within a year. And I'm like, what just happened? It's so weird. I asked my pastor if I had said someone else's name, would I have ended up marrying them? Like some people said, you secretly liked Hilda. No, I did not secretly like him. No, I did not. Let me be clear. And that always hurts his feelings, but it's true. But it was some kind of flash of insight or intuition in the moment. So sometimes it just happens when we're doing life. You might not even attribute it to intuition, but I would say, do take time to be still so you can listen if it shows up that way, but it might show up in other spontaneous, unexpected ways.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I know you have so many stories like this too, where it's you're just taking action on these knowings, and it's leading you so many cool places.
Oh, can I tell one more then?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I think we have time. Yeah. So, I heard that Luke's story was going to Cuixmala, this high-end biodynamic farm resort in Mexico. I think it's on the, is it on the Pacific or the Atlantic coast? I don't remember now. But anyway, I just knew that I wanted to go. And I thought, actually, it was like that deep knowing. Right. So I reached out to the people putting the thing together. And I said, hey, I'm a podcaster. I'd love to come. Can you work it out? Like some kind of deal. They're like, no, we already have a podcaster. It's Luke's story. So I was like, okay, but check this out. I didn't give up. I felt like I was supposed to be there. So I kept emailing them and, hey, can you let me know? And I could do this and that. I wasn't like going to shine shoes or anything to do it. Like I wasn't I wasn't desperately clinging. Your point is valid about the outcomes. I wasn't like desperate, this must happen, but I had a feeling it should happen. So I kept reaching out. Finally, when it was close to the date of the retreat, I guess they had a couple of free rooms and they said, come on, we'll cover you. All expenses paid. So I ended up in Mexico with Luke's story at this biodynamic farm. And then we got to go to this private beach. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because it was a lesson in perseverance, even though I wasn't like particularly wed to the outcome. But when we were on the beach, I looked over and I saw a boat that had a nickname that was dear to my heart. So I had former band members that used to call me Chispa, which means spark plug. And the boat said Chispita. And I was like, what are the chances? I felt so affirmed and it was so beautiful. And I can't get over it. And then the funny thing is too, just to wrap it up with a bow, when I was emailing the people organizing it, at one point they said, hey, thanks for your patience. And I was like, thanks for my patience. Like I was like pestering, but they didn't care because it was meant to be, so it's just interesting. So yeah, live your life, walk boldly and playfully and see what happens.
It's so cool. So I have when I teach about the nervous system to my students, learning about pain and the body, I talk about the labyrinth and the knowledge field. And the labyrinth to me is the brain, essentially, which is really prone to subjectivity, like our biases and our judgments. But I've learned working with fascia over the years. Maybe you know a little bit about it. I'm not sure. It sounds like a little bit.
A little bit.
But I've learned working with fascia that fascia, which is the most abundant tissue in the body and houses our water well. And there's so much we could, I'm sure we could get into with water. But if we can kind of put our consciousness, which is not synonymous with the brain, in my opinion, into that part of our body, then we actually have access to the knowledge field of like the universe, like God consciousness, like just what is, the isness of everything. And that's where I think if we can listen there and act on that knowledge, we're in alignment with life. We're in alignment with the universe, with God, with cosmos, with the laws of the universe, basically. And so much of what we do today, I think, is actually in violation of those laws. Like we're trying to have power over the laws that govern reality instead of learning them and learning to co-create with them. So you are absolutely embodying that. So I feel like we absolutely must circle back to the Weston A. Price and at least do a little bit on that, if you would. So
absolutely.
So what is the Weston A. Price Foundation?
So it's such a mouthful for starters. This is one reason I go by Holistic Hilda, because I'm like, Hilda Labrada Gore, no one can remember that, but Holistic Hilda, they might. So with the Weston A. Price Foundation, I usually just call them the Wise Traditions Group, because I think it's easier to wrap our head around. Also, basically, they are based on ancestral wisdom. And it's so beautiful because you're talking about this kind of God consciousness. There is a wisdom that our ancestors were able to tap into. They had customs and healthy lifestyle ways. I think even if you ask them, they might not know where they came from, but they came from somewhere, right? And so they were absolutely collaborating with nature's wisdom and learning from the trees and the roots and the plants and the lifestyle, the animals and so forth, all that was surrounding them in a beautiful way. They were in harmony. And we've kind of come into this disharmony, but I think we're starting to remember, which I'm thankful for. And I would say the Weston A. Price Foundation has been a player in some of that. So basically, they found or connected with the research of Dr. Weston A. Price, who was a dentist researcher in the 1930s. He traveled the world trying to find the healthiest people groups, those especially untouched by modernity, because he was practicing as a dentist in Ohio. He also wrote research papers. He was a fascinating man. But he noticed that the children coming into his clinic, and even some of the adults, obviously had cavities and crowded teeth, what he called dental deformities, all kinds of things going on, health conditions, poor vision, poor hearing, poor posture. The kids had poor behavior. And he couldn't help but contrast this with the people he saw in National Geographic magazine. I think he even had a relative working there. And he was like, what's happening? These people in this magazine look amazing. They have good posture, broad smiles, room for all their teeth in their jaws. There was no crowding and so forth. And he thought, I need to see these people for myself and see what their health lifestyle is like, and then analyze it and see if we can replicate it back home in the US, although I think he was originally from Canada. So he started taking trips around the world with his wife, Florence, every year for 10 years, every summer. They went everywhere from the South Sea Pacific Islands to Alaska, to Switzerland, to Kenya. And of course, the diets he came across were vastly different depending on where the people lived, but they did have things in common. For example, everyone was eating local, traditional foods, organic because that's what there was at the time, what was available to them, what their people had enjoyed for millennia. So in Switzerland, it was butter and milk and sourdough breads and so forth. In Kenya, it was meat and milk and blood. In Alaska, it was seafood, whale blubber, seal oil. So very different. So Dr. Price noted, though, also when he went to these villages, that some people had great health and the straight teeth and all the things he had seen in National Geographic, but others did not. And those who did not were starting to incorporate what he called the displacing foods of modern commerce. They had started to eat the white flour, the white sugar, include more of these things in their diet and leave behind the traditional foods. And so when people would say to him, for example, oh, it's just genetic, some people have the narrower faces because that's just how their parents were, he was able to show, no, some of these people were related. And the difference was their food and what they were eating and maybe what the parents were eating. And by the way, I will just say a note of hope for anyone who's noticed a narrowing of the jaw in their families or a narrowing of the facial structure. If you change your diet, your children's health can be reversed and they can be fixed. I shouldn't say fixed, given the proper building blocks in utero for the full genetic expression, which is their birthright. So Dr. Price noted this because on several occasions, I believe, and there are pictures in his book to prove it, there was a couple, for example, that was eating a certain way. They were departing from their traditional foods, and their kids started to have issues like clubfoot. I don't even know what clubfoot is, but it wasn't good. And, different issues with health and so forth. And the parents decided we're going to return to our traditional foods. And then subsequent children they had did not have those issues. So it's not too late it's never too late, I would say, actually, to start returning to traditional whole real foods that served our ancestors well. So all this to say, the Weston A. Price Foundation was founded by Sally Fallon Morell about 25 years ago, and she's getting the word out about the importance of eating whole real traditional foods, nose to tail, include bone broth, include ferments, all the things that these different people groups had in common that have served them well.
Yeah. So one of the things I love about it, and I think I actually got the cookbook when it came out, like pretty soon after. Like I was really into diet and nutrition in my 20s, and I also went to IIN, by the way. I don't know if we ever.
Hey, I forgot that. Okay.
But yeah, like to me, there's an underlying golden thread that runs through these things that maybe we don't talk about a lot, but it's trust in nature, maybe trust in God, we could even say, trust, and then trust in our bodies. And what I've seen happen over the last 100 years, but obviously in my lifetime, I've observed this, is we're being indoctrinated, essentially. I mean, this is the narrative in our culture, and then we adopt it to mistrust our bodies, to mistrust nature, that we are helpless victims to potential bad genetics or to just potential, tissue destroying diseases and, all kinds of things that could get us at any moment. And those things live in nature, which of course then can infiltrate our body or be, it's just, and what runs through, I think, most of these traditional cultures that is an inherent trust and also gratitude for the fact that this planet gives us life. And, so what have you witnessed with your travels with, not just the diets maybe, but that inherent trust in the planet, in each other maybe also, but then also just in our bodies and the life force that gives us our lives?
Wow. I have witnessed so many beautiful and powerful things. When I was in Ecuador in 2021, I got to be with some Quechua people who were celebrating an Inti Raymi festival, which happens usually in June, I think, around the solstice. And when I looked it up on Google, don't believe everything you read on the internet, by the way, but when I looked it up, it said it was like a sun worship festival. I was like, okay. It was so much more profound than that. Yes, they were offering gratitude to the sun, but also to the earth and also to God who put those things in place. It was a festival of celebration I would liken to Thanksgiving. And they have a tradition of dancing over a number of days and sharing a meal together in a kind of communal space in the community. And it was so glorious and so beautiful. And so I saw them. They said the earth to us is like the Pachamama, right? It is Mother Earth who has given us so much of its harvest and of its stores. We want to reinvigorate it in a thank you dance. So the dance includes a lot of stomping around. And I gave it a try, though I look like a girl that just dismounted a horse after 6 weeks or something. It was crazy. But they invited me to join them. And so I did. And it was absolutely beautiful. And this is the kind of thing I want to tell you too. So they have a sense of community and connection with one another. These traditions, they're still close to a respect for nature. And then also they turn to it when they're not well. Mm-hmm. So they told me that in 2020, a number of their community had gotten COVID. And so the women said to me, this woman, Christina, in the village, she said, we gathered medicinal plants and herbs and we took them to each household that was affected by COVID. And she said, no one died and no one was hospitalized. Mm. And my first question, Elisha, was, can I see the list of the herbs and medicines and the herbs and the plants that you gathered together? And then I realized, oh, Hilda, you're missing the point. It was given in the context of community and love and support. I suggest they might have even been taking Skittles house to house, and it still would have helped people because of that context, because of the energy with which they gave those things. So there is something we're desperately needing today, and it will not be found in any pill, prescription, physician, or medicine. There's no placebo or nocebo that can offer you what nature can, and community, I would say, and they go hand in hand. So I do think in the US, unfortunately, we have a tendency to be crazily independent in this way, where we do actually need each other and can turn to each other for help and support. So I think it's important to be intentional about seeking community out. This is one reason I have events. I'm doing one at Polyface in June. I'm a part of the Wise Traditions Conference in the fall in Florida. Like, I'm doing these things because I think the energy that we exchange is so powerful. I mean, I'm grateful for technology. Like you said, it's brought us together today. And in a lot of ways, it's been a blessing. But there's something that you can't quite measure in a lab that happens when people get together. And this is one thing that I seek to replicate wherever I go.
Yeah. And well, I love that it's wise traditions because there's something about wisdom that is hard to put into words, that has to be earned in a way, that has to be lived, and then it's simply embodied. That's my experience of it. Like, just, listening to a podcast, however great it might be, isn't going to make you wise. Reading a book, reading any of my really long newsletters. It's the lived experience. It's what you do with the information. Go, integrate it, live it, learn by living. And I certainly see you doing that, and that's so imbued in those ancient cultures. So what are you up to these days, Hilda? Like, what are your?
Thanks for asking. Well, I want to refer to something you just alluded to that we need to embody. And I do think this is one reason I say N=1 is because there can be a million studies on people, and studies show that this worked out, and everybody's always posting all over social media. There was a study that said this, a study said you shouldn't eat bananas before noon. I mean, there are crazy things out there, right? And it's like N=1, in my opinion, meaning you do you, boo, in modern language, or the language of 5 years ago. You do you, and see what works for you, see what resonates. I literally will stand in grocery stores sometimes, Elisha, and I will have a package of something. It could even be, blueberries or soaked granola, whatever it is. And I see if my body thinks this is good for me. And your body, if you're learning to tune in, will actually sway forward if it wants it, and back if it doesn't. Sometimes I'm like, okay, is there anything in here that you want? Because there's a lot of no's, but that's okay because I'm trying to listen and respect it. Mm-hmm. But going back to your question, so I actually just launched a course, and it may be too late for people to sign up this time, but my objective from the course is not to just have a digital library of videos for people. My objective is to get people to live out some of these ancestral secrets that I've come across. And so I have, it's part course, part challenge. So there are some videos so they can learn about even the science behind the secrets and tips for applying them. But then we walk together for 6 weeks to implement them and see how it goes, whether it's getting the early morning sun or prioritizing sleep. And these things are not rocket science. And that's maybe why they're so profound and healing, because they actually are things that have stood the test of time, as I said earlier. So I just launched the course. I'm going to be speaking in Texas in June and also in California. If people really want to find out everything I'm up to, they should go to my website, holistichilda.com. But I am continuing to explore because I feel like there are Indigenous people groups, maybe not completely isolated from modernity as the ones Dr. Price encountered 100 years ago, but who are still keeping their traditions. That's how I got to be a part of the Inti Raymi festival. That's how I got to be a part of some kind of peyote ceremony about a year ago now. I've gotten to do some amazing things because there have been Indigenous peoples willing to share their wisdom with me. But again, I didn't just get it by osmosis from them. I decided, okay, I'm going to incorporate some of these things I've learned into my own life. And that's where I have, thankfully, not just been aging, but saging.
Your energy is infectious, and if we could bottle that and pass it around, we would all be a little better off. So I love that. Not aging, saging. I would keep you here as long as I could. I know you're going to have to hop off here momentarily, but is there anything else you want to share with anybody about, just parting words of wisdom? And then we'll make sure to leave the show, in the show notes, all of the links to where people can find you.
I think it would be not to outsource your health. Mm-hmm. It's far too easy to look at the person with a white coat and the alphabet soup after their name and think, well, they know better than I do. You know exactly what you need to do. You know exactly what you need to do. It's a matter of stopping and listening and cultivating that sense of deep knowing and intuition. It will serve you well. Your body is on your side, by the way. It's not against you. The symptoms are not something bad that needs to be tamped down. It's your body's way of saying, hey, there's something that's a little off and I want to help you identify it and correct it. Because I do want actually everyone to live, energetically, full of vitality, all the things that are their birthright. And I think a first step may be stopping the outsourcing of the health and starting to look a little bit more within and up.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Hilda. You're an amazing woman, and I love your mission. I'm in support of it. I really honor and respect the way you listen to life, to your body, to people, to nature. You're always looking for truth, and you're very open-minded, and I've seen you, just open yourself to all kinds of new information since, over the years I've known you. So I think you're doing a wonderful service to the world, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. You are too. It's been my pleasure to connect with you, and I hope something I've said will be of help to folks.
Yeah, well, maybe we can do it again and dive a little deeper, because you have so much to share, honestly, and so many stories, I know. So
I would love that.
Thank you very much.